All right. So, how did you go about researching this book, Messages from the Light?
Well, that was based on my previous book on near-death experiences and religions. I had so many discussions and interviews with people who had a near-death experience that I thought I should do something more and write something more about that. So not comparing the religions with near-death experiences, which I did in my first book, but in this book, I thought I should stick to the themes that people with near-death experiences come up with, and there are a lot of themes that they come up with. And the interesting thing for me was that I thought these experiences are also important for people who didn't have an experience like that.
Okay, why is that?
Well, for myself, if I speak for myself, then it learns me how to what more or less the purpose is of being here and how to go about things. And I think if people would listen carefully to what people with near-death experiences say and to the themes, then I think we will change more towards a much better life for everyone.
What constitutes a near-death experience exactly?
Yeah, that's a interesting question because we have to understand that not one near-death experience is the same as another. There are no two near-death experiences that are the same. They're all different. So that's where it starts off with. Mm-hmm. And people who had a near-death experience are, most of the time they are convinced that this is the first step into their afterlife, or how you want to call that. And and then if you look at the contents of near-death experiences, they say that they have seen an unearthly environment, sometimes with cities or gardens, but very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And what they always say is that there is a sense of peace and quiet and happiness. If they had pain before they had their experience because of some kind of medical critical situation, and that pain just disappears. And talking about medical critical situations, most experiences happen during such a critical situation, but not all. There are a lot of stories of people who had a near-death experience, who have had similar kind of stories, but didn't have a critical medical situation. And that's interesting as well.
Well, one of the reasons why this is fascinating to me is because, I've had, reading through, my preparation for questions and reading through your book, I noticed certain things that people had experienced that I myself have experienced as an awakening, spiritual type experience without any medical emergency involved. And I was just like, wow, well, I understand that, I understand that, and I understand that. So, no, I didn't, I wasn't laid on a gurney or in a hospital bed or anything like that. But at the same time, I did have some kind of similarity to, and this is just my own personal story, to some of what these people were experiencing, which was one of the reasons why I identified so much with some of the things that they said. So, I don't know, obviously most people still consider that a near-death experience involves the trauma of a medical emergency and obviously somebody leaving their body and being at the point of death.
Yeah, I understand that, because the term near-death experience would suppose that you are almost dead first. But
right.
The term was coined by Ray Moody in his during his practice as a medical doctor. He came across a number of these stories of people who had these near-death experiences. There was not the terminology there yet, but he discovered that when people had such a thing, they were clinically dead. So that was after trauma or a medical critical situation. And that is the reason why he called these experiences near-death experiences. But after a while, scientists discovered that there are also people who, for instance, were in a psychological depression, a severe depression, existential depression, or just, I even came across someone who was sitting on the beach, and that was really amazing. It was baffling to me because, he told the whole story of a near-death experience with a life review, with seeing the light, with conversing with the light, things like that. And it was a complete, a very deep near-death experience, but he was sitting on the beach having a very thorough and deep discussion with his girlfriend. And during that discussion, he had this experience. Well, I thought it was very, remarkable.
Well, yeah, that would be. Did it interrupt the discussion? I mean, I would think be kind of hard to talk to her at the same time experience something like that. I mean, did he indicate that he had to stop talking to her at the time in order to fully absorb the experience?
Yeah, you would think that. Yeah, he had an experience, and if he would tell what the experience is, he would take at least a quarter of an hour, half an hour, and the whole experience seemed to last like a very long time. But he noticed that she was talking, and then her lips were moving, and then he went into this experience. And when he finished his experience, when he came back again, she just had finished that one sentence, and then and she didn't really understand that he had this experience because it was within the sentence. Maybe she noticed that I didn't speak to her, of course. I spoke to him only, and maybe she noticed only that he was not really there in the conversation at that moment, but she didn't notice anything particularly. But he had this experience, and it changed his life thoroughly. It really changed his life very much.
Well, I would assume something like that would absolutely have to. Take us through a prototypical, I mean, I know you said that not every near-death experience is the same, but let's take us through, say, a generalized idea of what most people would experience who have had a near-death experience.
Okay, that would, first people would escape from their body. They would be hovering above their body and seeing what is happening. They would see medical doctors or nurses trying to rescue them, or something else. They sit in a car against a tree, and then they might see more, and that would be interesting because sometimes they see things that can be confirmed later on, and those are interesting moments. But then if some people, I told you that not one experience is the same as the other, so some people just go back to their body again, but some people go further. They would go through a tunnel that is mentioned often, but some people just disappear directly into the light, or and then when they would go further, they might see wonderful environments. There is a very easy communication always, a very loving communication if it's there. Although I do have to say that there are also distressful NDEs. But the knowledge seems to be available and accessible for all of them to tap into, and it's vast. It's as if they can ask a question or just think of a question, and before finishing the question, the answer is already there, and that is interesting too. And another thing that's interesting is that time and space seem to be no limitations to them. That there are people who have told that they were thinking about their parents because they were in an accident, and they were curious how their parents would be. And then at that moment in time, they would be at the house of their parents and would see what is going on there. And other people say time is no problem because and they, all these experiences are ineffable. They cannot find the right words or concepts that we use on Earth to express what they have gone through. And time is one of those things they really can't wrap their fingers around. Some people say it was not in time, it was between time.
Mm-hmm.
And a very nice quote that I always want to tell is, it was not, the time was all there at the same time.
Mm.
And that gives you the impression that there is a unity universe.
Well, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the most important thing I should mention is that there is this love that is there, and the peace and the quiet and the happiness. But especially the love is something that overwhelms them so much, and this love is mentioned often as unconditional, especially when it comes from the light. And you have to understand what it means if it is unconditional. Mm-hmm. It means that there are no conditions attached. It doesn't mean that you need to do something in particular. You don't need to follow a certain diet or so, or have to be dressed up in specific clothes or pray every day in a certain direction or so. It is there for you, and there are no conditions to have it.
That is an amazing feeling, and I can totally understand why that would be so overwhelming or welcoming or whatever the term would be for those people who experience that. Now, is it typical for most people to say that they were met by, a deceased relative or not?
Not always, but there are people who see deceased relatives. But some people do only see beings of light, and some people only see the light. And some people just sit in a garden that is so wonderful, and then the flowers have such a colors that they can't find them on Earth anymore. These colors, it depends on, and not one NDE is the same as another.
Well, let me ask you this question then, because you did do the research on the five religions and the different experiences. So, for instance, religious celebrities, Jesus, Buddha, has a person who has passed over, say, who's a Buddhist or a Hindu, have they ever been surprised in seeing Jesus, or... You know what I'm trying to say? Or
yeah, of course. Yeah, most of the time, well, I'm living in a Western country with mainly Christian religions. They would see Jesus or Mary. But I know of some Muslims who have also seen Muhammad, and I know of a Hindu who saw some Hindu gods. Most of the time, if someone is really into a specific religion, they wouldn't see someone from another religion. And I don't know the reason why, but I would suppose that if you go over to that other area, that they want to welcome you in the best way they can. And if you are really vested into a Christian religion, you would be perhaps startled if you would see Krishna or so.
True.
Or the other way around. So all these religious celebrities, as you call them, have been seen in near-death experiences.
Now, then after that, they do proceed, because you were talking about this gentleman on the beach, too. Let's talk about the life review for a minute and what that sort of entails for the people who have experienced it. It's not like that judgment thing that most religions teach, is it?
No, it's totally different. And that is one of the things that I find very interesting, and for me that is one of the reasons why I think this is really true. They have the opportunity to see their life in very small details if they want, and it comes in different forms. Either sometimes it is like pictures flashing by, or sometimes it's like a film, or sometimes it's like emotions. but they can drill down to the smallest details. And the interesting thing is that they can see and feel exactly what their actions have had as a cause to someone else. And the interesting thing is that that this feeling about how this happened to someone else is so direct that it is as if they can feel it themselves, as if they are that other person themselves. I've heard that several times, and it is a very direct way of getting to understand what you have done in this world, or what your effect was in this world. And I think that is amazing. It is kind of an innovation to our thinking, because in the religions like the Christianity, in Muslim, in the Islam, and also in Judaism, there is this God outside of us who is going to judge us. It's always a man. He's going to judge us and then send us to hell, or we can proceed to go to heaven. But that is not the case in the stories of near-death experiences. If there is anyone who is judging, then it is yourself. And it is because you at that moment, when you're in the presence of this unconditional love, you see what you have done to others, and you have to understand that you are in this, that you can compare this unconditional love to the way you have been behaving in this world. And that is something that is very direct. It is very striking to people who go through this, and they see where they have gone, where they have chosen a less optimal solution. And I specifically say that because I've learned from near-death experience that we should not talk about good or bad. It is more optimal or less optimal, so to speak.
Okay. Well, that falls in line with so much of what. How my spiritual research has led me to view life and choices that we make, and things like that. So now in terms of the ripple effect that comes from things that people do in this lifetime. For instance, you said that when this person is reviewing their life, they're able to feel what that other person was feeling as if it were actually being done to them, which when you think about what, the Bible says itself about do unto others as you would have done unto you, that sort of like locks that whole idea right into place. But I know also you do mention in your book as well about the ripple effect, the things, and you mentioned on your website as well, that there's a ripple effect that takes place from certain actions that are done that affect people that we don't even know exist. During my interviews with some of these near-death experiences, that is one of the things that comes up regularly, the ripple effect, the fact that what you do has an effect in this world. I mentioned before that actually we live in a unity universe, and that is something that near-death experiences express often, and you can derive that also from the things that I said before, like time is there all at the same time. There is a vast knowledge that you can tap into. Space is no limitation, and you can feel exactly what you have done to others as if you are that other, and you have to bring that a little bit further. Actually, you are that other. So there are no boundaries once you are in that other side. And this ripple effect, that
that is something that you can then understand. If there is a unity universe, if everything is connected with each other, you can imagine or you can picture that as a kind of like it is a pond, a lot of water where all bits of water are in connection with each other. If you just throw in a stone on one end of the pond, the ripples will cross over to the other end. It will affect everything. Mm-hmm. And that is something that was told to me by several people who had a near-death experience. There was this one woman who had this wonderful experience. It was just after the war in the Netherlands. There was nothing. We were really a devastated country. And she went to school, and she had a few sweets, and she shared them with a school friend. And this school friend was like surprised that she was chosen to have a few of her sweets, and that this feeling of happiness with this school friend. The woman that I was talking about before, that was during her life review, she saw that moment in her life. She could drill down to this particular detail, and she saw how this school friend of hers was so happy. But she also saw that it was also the mother who became happy because of this feeling with her daughter. And she saw that it did not stop with the mother or the daughter. She saw in her near-death experience that it went further. It was like a ripple going through all the world, and it goes to places that you have never been or will never be to. And the same thing that is a little bit more depressing. Yes. It was said by a woman who tried to commit suicide, and she saw what would happen when she would succeed. She saw that it would really be a devastating thing in the world because her presence on Earth is required, like everyone's presence is required. Everyone's presence is indispensable. You are indispensable. So she saw what would happen if it succeeded, and fortunately it didn't go through. So so the ripple effect is really something that we have to take into consideration when we do things.
That's really amazing. I mean, I know that people don't think about that in all seriousness in their daily lives. I mean, they think about it as maybe in an idealistic way. Well, it would be nice if I could be this way or whatever, but what good does it really do? Where on the other hand, if they could understand that, I mean, even if something like this eventually became something that people were taught, from an early age, as part of their educational system, what it means to be a human, it could really rapidly change things. Say that again?
It is being taught in some of the religions, especially in the Christian religion. It's taught that you have to be considerate of other people, yet we don't do that all the time.
It's being taught, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, obviously it is. I mean, I grew up learning that, but I don't think people actually understand the full effect. I just don't think that they understand, because there's still a sense of separation, at least from what I understand. Yeah. Most religions still somewhat drop a wall between you and your divine self and the unity of the universe. So therefore, that concept of that whole motion of kindness reaching out and really kicking up, momentum doesn't really, they don't really get that. I know I didn't get that. And but anyway, I mean, I think that that's really a wonderful thing. I think that's very encouraging, and I hope that...
The thing is also that religions not always give the good example. Religions are made by people, and the people in religions do not always give the good example too. Unfortunately, yeah.
No, this is very, very true. Now, let's talk about this. I'm going to take this quote out of your book and see if you can tell me a little bit more about it. There is no friend and no enemy. It is a silly game of adults. It is not the truth. And this was something that a 4-year-old Dutch girl at a Japanese concentration camp said. Can you tell us a little bit about her and about what caused her to say that and what she meant by all of that?
Yeah, that was an amazing woman. She was She is now an elderly woman, of course, because she was 4 years old when she was in the Japanese camp in Indonesia, where she lived. There was the previous colony, one of the previous colonies of the Netherlands. We were a colonizer. But she was in this concentration camp. That was not really a fun. It was a terrible, really terrible situation. And as a 4-year-old, she had to stand outside for hours together with family and everyone there, and they were not allowed to move. And then she had her. She was in the sun for this all time, and she was very undernourished. So she was very ill, and then she had her near-death experience. And during this near-death experience, that was one line that you said just now that really struck her, and it gave her the impression that the Japanese people that were doing these things to them, they were not actually the enemy. They were just as valuable, if you want to put it that way, as they were themselves. This division that we make ourselves, and that was the idea that was given to her during her near-death experience, and that actually is also what other near-death experiences say. There is no division. We cultivate our ego. And it is very easy because if you're young and you grow up, if you hit the hot kettle on the stove, no one gets hurt but yourself. So you know that you are there and you have to avenge for yourself. Mm-hmm. But in fact, we are all together. We are all one. And that feeling that came across to this little child in her near-death experience.
Now, what happened with her, though? Can you tell us a little bit more about her story? Did she eventually get out of the camp? Finally,
she was rescued, of course, and then she could go back to the Netherlands with her family, and there she lived further. But even she knew that there was something strange going on, because you have to understand, if children get a near-death experience, they sometimes it's so difficult for them to see that it is something strange. They know that it's strange, but sometimes they even think that other people have something like that as well, so they forget more or less about it.
Right. Right.
But in this case, she knew that she was supposed to write something about this. And she knew that when she was 4, mind you. And finally, she did write a book on her experience. But she went to the Netherlands, and she still had to cope with with this trauma. Because this concentration camp is not really fun to be in. And that is something she had to cope with after a while. And then later on, she had a second near-death experience, and then she understood that she had this experience when she was 4, and how that affected her in the rest of her life. She's a very interesting lady.
She sounds like a really interesting person. Now, one of the things I'm noticing from what you said in terms of her, and also I believe you touch upon it in the book. Now, people have these experiences. They transcend this mortality. They experience another level of reality, and then they come back. Because they have to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a near-death experience. Yeah. And it's not all peaches and cream.
No.
They really, really struggle. Why isn't it that one would think that you just came back from a great vacation, where you saw the light and experienced unconditional love and saw family and friends that you haven't seen in a long time, and then you come back and then all of a sudden you just don't want to be here, or you have to readjust to being here, or what do you think that is?
Yeah, what you say is actually what happens to, I think, all the people that I spoke to who had a near-death experience. Coming back is such a difficult thing. This woman that we just spoke about, the 4-year-old who had a near-death experience later on, she said, when you're over there, you are so free. It is such a huge, enormous, vast freedom that you have. And when you come back, this travel back goes so quick, but you get into firmer constructions, and the final firmest construction is your own body, and that is so painful. That is really something that more people with a near-death experience would say, that coming back is so difficult. And she said it in this way. And I'm so happy that I have spoken to so many of these people who came back to tell their stories. And I would wish that more people would be open about it. And I know that it is difficult for people who had a near-death experience to be open about it, because sometimes they are in a surrounding that would not allow for something like that, or that wouldn't believe them. Yet they have had an experience that we all can benefit from, because it could change the world. And I'm sure that with many more, and the number of people who had such an experience is growing every day, that after a while, when we break a certain critical point, we will feel and see what is happening in the world.
Is it scientifically proven now that NDEs are a scientific fact? Isn't that a scientific fact now, that NDEs are real?
Yeah. The scientific people, that is also psychiatrists, and so they do understand that this is something that is real. It is an experience that so many people have. You have to understand that about 4 to 5% of the people in Western countries, and this was in a statistical research in the United States, and I believe in Germany, they came up with this figure: 4 to 5% of the people who have had such an experience. In the United States, that will be 16 million people.
That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculously outrageous number. I mean,
it's a high number, and not everyone is telling that. And again, some people have a very deep near-death experience. Some people have a very, would be but shallow. It doesn't sound very nice, but I don't want to make it sound not nice. I don't know a good English expression there, but a less deep experience. But there will be 16 million people in the United States, and in my country it will be like 700,000. Of course, my country is a little bit smaller than yours.
Right. Yeah. That's a huge number. Now, I'm going to say that with this, are we talking again about the medical type death experiences where somebody leaves their body? Because I'm beginning to think that, from just listening to what you're saying, and say, let's just maybe say somebody has, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with the word, a Kundalini awakening, or they have their chakras awaken, or now that would constitute a slightly different kind of spiritual experience. It would constitute a death of some sort, because they would immediately begin to sense the difference between their personality and, say, the grander scheme of life, that maybe on some level there is, a near-death experience is just, a different type of spiritual experience. It's just a different, but to me that would say, okay, then I can see 60 million people having that kind of an experience, and that maybe many people do have some kind of connection, awakening, meeting with the light in their life, where maybe, again, it's not a medical trauma that's involved, but they do have that, and then they either close it off, they forget about it, but they do have it, because that's just a huge number. That's a huge number of people to have that kind of an experience. Yeah,
that some people who have some of the characteristics of a near-death experience, when they hear what a near-death experience is or how it is being talked about, then they realize that they have had such an experience themselves. Some people don't realize that, and but the number that I mentioned, I understand that was really near-death experiences. So with the characteristics that I mentioned.
Okay, so that was okay.
Yeah, and there would be a lot of people apart from that who had a different kind of spiritual experience. And people who who meditate sometimes do feel disconnected with their body, or sometimes they see themselves hovering above their body, or something like that. But that would be just a very first start, I would say, of a near-death experience. Near-death experience is really that you get to see much more than only an out-of-body experience. It would be this feeling of peace, especially unconditional love, the time limitations not there, light, beings of light, the light, light of you, things like that. That would be the near-death experience for me.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the AWARE study. Is that still going on, and how is that working out? I mean, does that seem like a practical thing? For the people that are listening, the AWARE study has to do with, I believe, 25 major medical centers, and it's a 3-year study of the biology of the near-death experience.
Yeah, that's still going on. I believe next year we are supposed to be seeing some results, the first results from this study. A part of the study is in veridical observations, as it is called. I have to explain what that is. You remember I spoke about leaving your body and at the first moments being able to see what is happening to your body or to the surrounding area.
Right.
And then some people do see things that can be confirmed later on. Those would be called veridical observations, because those are observations that you can verify later on that they were, like they saw a tennis shoe in the on the roof of the hospital while they were floating outside of the body. The shoe had been found. That's just one example. There are so many of these examples. The problem with these examples is that that science doesn't take them into consideration, because you cannot do this kind of research over again. You can't ask this woman to have the next near-death experience and go somewhere else and see if she can see some other shoe somewhere or so.
Well, that would be my question. I mean, what do you do? I mean, how do they do? They kind of. I'm being humorous here, so forgive me. You do hover around hospitals, waiting for somebody to come back into their. I mean, how would you even know this experience took place? I mean, how do they get their subjects for this sort of a thing?
Yeah, and that is the way it should be done. It is, as they call it in science, it is a prospective way of finding your database. And it sounds like very clinical, but the database is the people who have a near-death experience. These people should be found in an objective way. So what they do is they in this awareness study, they have a number of hospitals that participate, and they have in the operation room, for instance, they would have hidden signs somewhere on laying above the somewhere near the ceiling. Because the funny thing is, most people who exit their body, who have their out-of-body experience, they always say they hover above. They go up. Sometimes they go down, but most of the people, they say they go up. And from an elevated point of view, they can see what is happening. So what they do is to put some hidden signs on a cupboard or something that is elevated, in the hope that when someone does have a near-death experience, they would see this. And then when they come round again, when they are resuscitated, then they would say, well, I've seen this and that on the cupboard.
Right. But having a near-death experience, call 1-800-200 when you get back into your body, sort of a thing, huh?
Something.
Seems like.
The funny thing is that, when you speak to near-death experience, and you tell that, they would say, come on, When I was in my near-death experience, the last thing that I would be doing is looking for hidden signs, because the whole experience is overwhelming. It is you are out of your body. That's a feeling most people have never had.
Mm-hmm.
They have to adjust to that first. They are overwhelmed. They don't know what is happening to them. So and most of the time they don't even understand that their body that is lying down there is theirs. So those kind of stories are there as well. So I don't think this kind of research will really lead to conclusive outcome. But I hope that they, that they will do something else as well, that they would also take a video of the operation dome. I would think that would be a nicer way to go ahead, but I think that the privacy laws would be against that, because sometimes they tell that the doctor did that and this or that, and when you go back into this video, you would see that. I mean, right. That would be interesting to someone who had a near-death experience. What is happening down there? What is this guy doing? Oh, that's my body. Oh my God, what he's doing in my body, and things like that.
Right.
If someone could really tell that afterwards, and then they would really see what was happening at that moment through the video, then that would be more conclusive. By the way, there has been this study of people with a near-death experience and people without a near-death experience, and they were asked, how does an operation go about? The people who had a near-death experience were much more concise on what is going on in an operation dome than the people who didn't have a near-death experience, because they have seen what has happened there.
Right. Well, that certainly sounds a good way to get some kind of conclusive evidence that's in favor of the near-death experience. Yeah. Although, it seems like, the study that we're talking about here, that it does seem to me, from my perspective, to be futile too, because this whole near-death experience is such a grand, larger spiritual thing that to try to get some kind of, grasp upon it in 4 dimensions seems to be a very limited thing. But at the same time, if it can lead people to understand that there is something that's really happening here, something that ultimately affects us all, and we can become more familiar with it, more comfortable with it, then it's actually done a good thing. Let's see, where do I want to go here? Let's talk about some of the extraordinary abilities that people who have had near-death experiences find that they have once they've come back to their bodies, whether it's prophecy or being able to travel, leave their bodies at will.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Those are the after effects. People who had a near-death experience do have. They change thoroughly from what they were before. One of the things would be that they would become more intuitive. Their fear of death disappears because they know that there is no death. They know that the consciousness just continues, and they continue, although they would more or less, be part of this unity thing that is out there, more so than we feel now. Mm-hmm. You mentioned to be paranormal, or you alluded to that. Yeah, that is something that would happen to some of the people. They would be able to predict the future or to see things that happen in the future. They do have problems with time. Mm-hmm. They cannot really work in schemes anymore. They are very sensitive to medicine, for instance. They can use less medicine than normal people. The people who didn't have a near-death experience. Mm-hmm. And they become more sensitive to scent, to light, to sounds. Yeah, and then of course they have this homesickness. They really feel that they belong somewhere else, and yeah, they would like to go back, but they also understand that it is necessary for them to stay here and to do things, and
and that's where they would have a specific task that we mentioned earlier. That they find out that they have something that they're specifically required to do, or they just are given the idea that they have a purpose, and they kind of connect with that purpose.
Yes, yeah. Everyone does have a purpose on Earth. I just mentioned also that you are indispensable. Everyone is indispensable, and you're required to be here. And it even seems that we have chosen ourselves to be here in this particular place where we are to learn specific things. And so, yeah, that will be a thing. And one of the things that everyone has a task. We do have something to do here on Earth, and we don't always know what that is. And I know about this because there are so many people who, during their near-death experience, they wanted to stay, but they were told you have to go back. And then sometimes they don't want to go back, and then they are told you have to do something on Earth. There is a reason for you to be there. And then sometimes even people are shown what they were required to do or what their purpose was. And then they say, of course, then I go back. And the moment they go back, they totally forget what that is. But they know that they have this sense of something to do here. And that is funny because when you speak to these people, they are sometimes, I wish I would know what that was. But I
yeah. They don't remember.
No.
Oh, well, that's just not.
Yeah,
right.
But the whole thing is that you get so much knowledge over there. There's a vast pool of everything that you can tap into, but you can't bring everything back again into this little small body. It cannot contain it. Our brains aren't suitable for getting all this knowledge in. So yeah, I understand that they do forget about this.
Now, how did say somebody travels over and they were a devout Catholic or a devout Baptist or whatever. After they've had this experience and they come back, do they still retain that same level of devoutness towards the religion, or have they sort of expanded in their thinking?
Yeah, they're expanded there. Yeah, the point is that they are less they become how to say that, less religious, more spiritual. They don't like the formal signs of religions because they are restrictive. And I told before that this feeling of freedom that they had there is so expensive. It's so wonderful. And when they come back to all these restrictive constructions that are there, and your body, as I mentioned before, is one of them, is a very restrictive thing. But also the things we think of ourselves, the concepts that we made, the authorities that we create, the limitations in thinking that we put onto ourselves and others, those things are things that they don't really like. Yeah.
Okay, so does that mean religion is not a good thing?
No. The funny thing is one of the people who had a near-death experience asked bluntly, that was Howard Storm. I can mention his name because he wrote a book about his experience. Mm-hmm. He really asked, what is the best religion? And then the answer was, any religion that brings you closer to God. And that just, it means that it doesn't matter what kind of religion. The purpose is being close to God or the light or... And actually, God is not something outside of us. We all have God within us. We all have the divine light or spark of it within us. We are like a speck of sand on the beach, and the whole beach is God. We are part of God. So that is something that does not really match with the three Judeo-Christian, Muslim or Islam religions.
No, I actually find that horrifying these days. I grew up in a very conservative religion. And I mean, God was something definitely outside of us. And the notion of God being inside, I can remember my father even saying, well, he's inside because you read the word of the Bible and that puts his words in your head, and that's how come he's in there. But I was like, wait a minute, no. It's there's more than that. It's got to be more than that. But no, people don't feel that. They feel that God is separate from them, and then there's this huge chasm between them and the divine, and that, just kind of leaves, people feeling much less than, much less than. It's good to know, and I hope listeners are who are, at least thinking along these lines or are curious along these lines, that, people that do pass over or go through these near-death experiences come back and they shake themselves free from some of the shackles that, traditional religion binds them in, because they have seen something that's freer, something that's more unconditional, something that's less judgmental. I just want to say, too, also to our listeners, we're getting towards that time when we'd love to have you call in, ask a question of Christopher, or share your experiences. It's toll free. The number, again, is on the Bright Side page, so feel free to call in. What about free will, Christopher? How does free will figure into this? Because if somebody is on the other side and they're having a great time in the light, and then are they given the option of coming back, and they say, well, no, I don't want to come back, I want to stay?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. The question, they have the opportunity to choose there, and in some cases, it seems as if they don't have the choice, or rather, they are politely asked to go back. And then one person said, if the voice says you should go back, it is like as if your mother tells you not to do something, and you don't do it. So, or in this case, you do it. You go back. There seems not to be a choice. But in some cases, people came back and they said, yeah, I had a choice, but there was this reasoning why it was better for me to go back. As I told you, we do have a task. There is a reason for me being here. So I shouldn't die at this moment. I have to go back. So that's what they do. Of course, I don't know how many people do choose to stay after they are in that particular area, because we don't get to speak to them. They die. Yeah,
right.
So I only speak to the people who come back again. So and they say either it is a nice and very loving, authoritative thing or voice that tells you you have to go back, and you do that, or you have the choice and you do go back. Either way.
Do you? And this is a bit of an aside, but you said you speak to these people. How do you find them? Do they get in touch with you these days, or how do you find them?
Well, I do give presentations and lectures, and then there are always people in the audience that have a near-death experience. So that is how I come across. And I'm also the president of the International Association for Near-Death Experience in the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. There is also an IANS in the United States and I go there as well each year for a congress. Different ways that I come across these people, and this is not the scientific way to do it, because it's a very subjective way. But nevertheless, I don't need to abide by by science. For me, it is very interesting to try to find the topics or the themes that they come up with, and that is what I try to put in my book. It is called Messages from the Light, and it is because I show in this book the themes or the messages that are there for everyone. And one of the important messages that I try to bring across is also that we have to change from our short-term self-interest our focus on that, and then we have to really change that into a longer term our interest, because that would be better for the world, for people that will inhabit the world after us, and it will be good for other people as well. We should not really be only focused on our own self-interest. That has brought us actually this crisis that we are in. And there might be other crises to come if we don't change. It is not something that I say. It is something that I understand from people who have had a near-death experience.
Again, yeah, well, I totally agree with you. I mean, we're back again to the ripple effect, to that one action reaching out and reverberating and reverberating and reverberating. And it seems like if we are living in an extremely self-centered life, then we're contributing not in a positive way towards reverberations that can help change and benefit people. There's a title, there's a chat, and by the way, again, I'm going to remind everybody to call in and take a minute also, Christopher, to just tell everybody what your website is and how they can get hold. And are your other two books in English, the one about Michael and the other one about the 5 major religions and NDEs, can they be gotten in English or not?
Unfortunately not. No, they are in Dutch. Although I've been thinking of doing this book on near-death experiences and religions in English, because I think that would be. I think in the United States it would be interesting for people to read, because I also think that in the United States some people are really vested into the strict religions. And that would be Christianity. While from near-death experiences, you get to understand the idea that there is freedom. You can think more than only this particular way, and there is more to be seen. And spirituality is the way to go. And you can get that through a religion, but not when this religion is only the formalities around it. So, and the other one on my brother Michael, who died of AIDS long ago. No, that's in Dutch as well.
Okay.
And the website would be www and then Christopher with an O .nl, and NL stands for the Netherlands. And people, if they go there, they can see also a kind of form that they can get into contact with me if they would like to ask further questions.
Is that Christopher Copes as well, or just Christopher.nl?
It is the easiest way is Christopher with an O.nl, but you can also access through www and then Christopher Copes, COPES.com. Okay, super. I hope everybody that's listening that is interested in getting in touch with Christopher and either sharing your experiences or even looking into getting a hold of messages from the light, particularly, which is in English and which is really quite interesting. Forgiveness is an act of love. That's the title of one of the chapters of your book. Can you just talk a little bit about that? I believe that involves Desiree, who was one of the people that you interviewed in your researching. Yeah, she was a little girl who was caught up in incest, unfortunately, with her father. And of course, it's a terrible thing that so many people go through. She's certainly not the only one, as you might imagine. And she had her near-death experience later on in her life, and then she understood that she could choose either to feel a victim, to stay feeling a victim, or feeling an offended child. Of course, she had every right to feel that way because she was a victim and she was offended seriously. But she also understood that she was more than that. She was an angel, like I think we all are. she saw that there was a divine light within her, and that she had to respect, and that is something that that made her stop feeling the victim and the offended child, because she knew that she could do much more than that. And she also understood that forgiving her parents, because also her mother more or less knew about what happened there, would bring much more ease and quiet. It would erase some of the ripples, as love always does. You can create negative ripples.
Mm-hmm.
They would be the ripples that would freeze the energy in the world. But you can also create positive ripples. Those are the ripples of kindness, of generosity, of love, and these ripples would create energy or vibrations.
My mother always used to say, love covers a multitude of sins, and that's one of the things that always used to stay with me in terms of that. I see we have.
I think that would actually be what she mentioned there. I think that would be forgiveness. Love, if there is a lot of sins, if there is love on the other side, it just neutralizes that.
It neutralizes that. I mean, back again to the light and the unconditional love, accepting, the person that's coming into it with that sort of unconditional love. It's like sins sort of, I'm sure grosser sins are dealt with, but I think so much falls away in the presence of that kind of love. We have one of our more frequent callers on, I believe, Carl from Delaware. Let's get him on the line and see what he has to ask you. Hello, Carl. How are you?
Pretty good. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you, too.
Okay.
You have a question for Christopher?
The question for Christopher is, if a person who had a history of committing sinful activities like murdering somebody or disrespecting the religion, would he experience hell in a near-death experience? And also, if he ended down in hell for a certain amount of time, would it cause a person to better himself?
Oh, interesting question. Yeah, it's absolutely an interesting question. It touches upon so many things. The word sinful is something difficult. What we said before is that there is this unconditional love on the other side that is really unconditional. That actually would mean that it would be able to accept any sin, whatever you might mention. I think you mentioned murder and disrespect of religions. I do believe, and that is also what I hear from people who had a near-death experience, that in principle, this light, this unconditional light, would be able to still love someone who did things like that. Having said that, there is something else that I also have to mention, is that there have been reports of hellish kind of near-death experiences. Now, these experiences are difficult because we still don't really know how they are caused. And it's very difficult to pinpoint whether someone who had a distressful near-death experience, we call it that way, was a bad person. It is difficult to determine what is bad. What is a bad person? Sometimes it's easy to pinpoint someone as bad, but then there are so many shades of gray, I would say. And there have been cases of people who had a distressful near-death experience who said, I know I have done things wrong, but these things that I've done wrong are not in such a way that I should deserve something like that. I'm just like any other ordinary person doing things wrong and doing things right, and I don't really understand why I should deserve this.
So they think.
Well, so they think. Yeah, but that could be the case. But then, if I would go further, it is still difficult to say anything certain about these distressful near-death experiences. But I do think that there might be some causes for these near-death experiences. That is, when people turn away from love, and it's difficult to say when that is. This person that I mentioned before, this Mr. Howard Storm, who wrote a book about himself, he said he had this fall into hell, as he mentioned, and that was because he was so much invested in his own ego, and he thought that other people were a nuisance, and he didn't believe in anything, no God, nothing. But I would say the reason that he had a distressful near-death experience would be that he was so into himself and not into other people, that he was not able to see the light or not able to see love. And the moment that he turned towards the light, it was there. And there have been other cases of people who had a distressful near-death experience who were, one started meditating and then noticed that the colors around him turned from dark into a purple, so it was more light, and the feeling of fear disappeared a little bit more. So I would say there are possibilities to escape, and that will be turning towards light, turning towards love, focusing on that. Those will be the things that I understand that you can get out of these distressful near-death experiences.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that Carl took the answer off the air, but that was a great way of letting people know that this is. It's just not one-sided. I mean, there are people that do have experiences that can be a little frightening. But as it seems, those that have taken the opportunity to recognize that they have a connection to the light, their own selves have managed somehow to change the shape of that experience.
Yeah, and the important thing is that we are a part of the light, and we cannot disconnect ourselves from it. So even if you would try, you cannot. So I think that even people who are in a distressful experience would be able to come out there eventually. And
right.
Because the point is that this unconditional love that people talk about, the word tells it is unconditional. There is no sin that could not be covered by this unconditional love. That is the thing that I would bring across.
Let's take another caller here. Let's see, Will. Hey, Will, how are you? Oh, hold on. Will?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey,
yeah,
how
listen,
you doing?
Pretty good. I'd like to ask your guest a real quick question.
Okay.
It's a little different. Say a person has an NDE, and say he crosses over to the other side, and he meets a relative, maybe say a father or something, and they passed over. And they give the person that has the NDE a message to give to another relative. Now, has he ever in his research run into that where somebody, they were clinically dead, they had an NDE, said they met, say, like their father, and the father gave them a message to give to the mother, but it's a message that only the mother would know, and that would have some ounce of proof that NDEs are really actual proof. And I'll take the message off the air.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, there have been cases like that, but I tried to. I thought of a kind of experience that someone. How was that again? There was someone who had a near-death. Oh yeah, that was it. Who had a near-death experience and saw someone over there on the other side who was still alive. At least that was what he thought. And he was surprised. Something like, "Oh, are you here?" And then when they resuscitated this person, he came by and he asked about this person. I think it was his uncle or so. And then apparently this particular uncle had just died. So he had seen this guy on the other side before he knew that this person was dead. He couldn't have known it because he was in this medical or critical situation. That was one example. And there was another example that I came across that I read about, actually. I can't really remember how that was, but there was, during the near-death experience, this person saw or encountered someone who, after the near-death experience, proved to be his father, but he didn't know about him until he saw, when he came back again, he saw a picture, and he asked, "Who is this guy? I met him on the other side." And then the mother, who had always been silent about his real father, said, "Well, yeah, that was your real father, this person on the picture." And he had seen this guy during his near-death experience. So that would be actually the closest thing to what Will just asked, like giving a message. That is a kind of message, I would say.
Yeah, I would think so. That's really quite fascinating to have it happen that way. Reincarnation. While we're waiting for some more callers to call in, reincarnation, what do your ND ears have to say about reincarnation, the people that you've spoken to?
Yeah, reincarnation is something that, there is something about that. Most people who had a near-death experience, they say, that there is, either they believe in it or they say there is something around that. But there are also near-death experiences who say, well, yeah, I can't relate to this. I haven't seen it over there. I don't feel it is true. So it is a kind of mixed idea. But I believe that reincarnation would involve something that has to do with the afterlife, of course, because it's the idea
right.
that you die and you go back to Earth in a different body. But the idea of that is thought of by people who are in our 4 dimensions, that is 3 space dimensions and 1 time dimension. And thinking about reincarnation in the 4 dimensions that is less than maybe there is out there in reality is like, it's difficult to talk about something that you can't really see or prove. No one can really see or prove that there is reincarnation. It is like I mentioned one of the quotes of the end of the year. This little girl who 4 years old,
right,
in the Japanese camp. She said it is like an apple who has to say something about being an orange. It is incomparable. You can't, being in this 4 dimensions, say something about what is happening in maybe 5, 6, or 7 dimension world. Because I think this other world is a more dimensional world. We can't see that. We can't really grasp the idea about that.
Well, I know I had read Betty Eadie's book, Embraced by the Light, and I was all caught up in it, and then I got to the point where she said there was no reincarnation. I was just like, whoa, wait a minute, that just...
Well, she says it differently. She says it is invested in the memory in the cells.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the lives that we think we've had in the past lives of cellular memory.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I can also, account for personal experiences of my own where I have kind of wondered as to why it is that certain people say, have, you have your great musicians, or you have people that don't need a lot of, some people need to go through a lot of hardship in order to get to point B. Some people don't need to go through a lot of hardship. A little slap on the wrist and they're at point B. So it's kind of, everybody, it seems almost as if there was some kind of cumulative experience that makes one person able to respond with a little less of a stimulus towards opening themselves up towards more spirituality in their lives. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm not any authority on it either. I do know that it was a surprise to me, and I also understand at the same time that we can't really know, can we?
No. No, but the interesting thing is that one person said that actually it's God that reincarnates. And with reincarnation, there is something true, but it would be in a totally different way as we think it is, because we think we go from one body to the other as if we are ourselves still. But when you really hear what near-death experiences say, they say there you have this unity universe, this unity thing, this whole thing that we all belong to. When you die, you just dive back into this pool. Maybe you totally dissolve in this whole thing. And when a new child is born, they take a little part of that whole thing again and put it in there, because there's a speck of light in everyone. So the memories of this previous person that had died is perhaps with everyone. And that would still mean that there is a kind of reincarnation, but that is God who reincarnates every time and again.
Well, we had on our show recently a lovely lady called Susie Ward, who had written a book, Matthew Told Me About Heaven, and her book was about her son who had passed in 1980 and who began 14 years later in 1994 to telepathically communicate with her from a place that he described as nirvana. A lot of some of the things that we covered tonight are covered by him to a degree. Obviously, from where he's quote unquote reporting, they have already there are people who, those people in his world have not returned to the earth through an NDE experience, but are what we would consider those who have passed over. But he had a way of explaining the reincarnation as the differences between, say, what would be considered the soul, and then the personality being the soul being the cup, the personality, say, being a drop from the cup, and then the ocean, itself of being God. So it is interesting how you have to take a little bit from here and a little bit from here and a little bit from there, and then I guess we kind of all have to put together our own sort of hodgepodge idea from all of that as to the most that we can take comfort from as we go forward, kind of not knowing. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think, I don't rule out reincarnation as we think it is, but I think it is. I'm sure, and that is also being told by people near-death experiences who thoroughly believe in reincarnation. They say the truth surpasses everything, because where we are now, we don't understand everything. We just think we understand everything, but we understand just a tiny little bit. And the truth is so much bigger that you can't really think of it, or we can't grasp anything of that. So the truth about reincarnation, I think we have to wait until we really die.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I think you actually use this on your website as well. The whole idea of the blind men feeling up the elephant, trying to define it, and for one it feels this way, and for one it feels this way, and that's kind of where we're at. We don't have that ability to see the whole thing at all, or the whole image or the whole idea. We only see a small portion of the idea, and we can only go from that. We have about a few more minutes left, and while we might be waiting for other callers to call in, I would like to talk a little bit about the chapter on great changes You said that at an IANS conference, an NDEer said he had seen three things: the collapse of important tall buildings, the destructive flood along the endless stretches of coastline, and something that resembled people being pulled back from the ocean shores. And I think that you had said that the collapse of the important tall buildings, of course, would be 9/11. And this is what this guy had seen in his experiences on the other side. I'm taking it. The second being the 2004 tsunami. And the third one, at that particular point in time of your writing of the book, had not really, been defined yet. And
unfortunately, this person has died, so I can never ask him anymore what it would be, and it could be still in the future, or I don't know, but maybe there have been other people with previews of what is going to happen. One woman that I spoke to has really seen this great recession that we are still struggling with, also in the United States. She saw that happening just before it really took off. I spoke to her half year before, and she told me about it, and that was amazing to me, because then I understood that she could be right. And
this is something that they're shown? Are they being shown this by angels? Are they being told this, telepathically communicate this information?
Well, she had her near-death experience 22 years ago. By now, I think 25 years ago. It was in '86, and she had this information in an elevated form of communication, and it is in feelings. And she didn't understand any bit of it until we spoke to each other just half a year before the crisis. And that was the moment in time that Bear Stearns was just rescued, and everyone thought, okay, we are done. It's okay. We are happy. We can go on again. And then she said to me, no, I know now that this feeling that I had during my near-death experience 22 years ago exactly matches with the tension that was there just before the rescue of Bear Stearns. And she said, I know that in a little bit of time, it's really going to happen, and it will be really severe. And then Lehman Brothers fell, and that was the start of this crisis. So she told me that half year before. And, this information comes in an elevated form, and they can't really get their fingers around. Just like this thing that you mentioned just before, that people seem to be going from the seashore.
Right. I'm wondering if that's not the Japanese, the event that happened in Japan just recently.
It could be. It could be. I can't ask him anymore. Mm-hmm. But about the earthquakes, some of the near-death experiences that I spoke to recently, they said, well, there will be more of these things now. These earthquakes. So I'm just waiting. I don't know.
Christopher, in the final few minutes of our program, can you sum up for our listeners what lessons you think we should take from these people that have had these experiences, how these experiences can help better our lives?
Yeah, the main thing that I would try to bring across, and that was also from this lady who saw the Great Recession, she said, and many more said, we are too much focused on our short-term self-interest, and we really have to change that, and it will change. If we don't change, then there will be more crises and more turmoil to have.
Experience that I myself have experienced as an awakening spiritual type experience without any medical emergency involved. And I was just like, wow, well, I understand that, I understand that, and I understand that. So, no, I didn't, I wasn't laying on a gurney or in a hospital bed or anything like that. But at the same time, I did have some kind of similarity to, and this is just my own personal story, to some of what these people were experiencing, which was one of the reasons why I identified so much with some of the things that they said. So, I don't know, obviously most people still consider that a near-death experience involves the trauma of a medical emergency and obviously somebody leaving their body and being at the point of death.
Yeah, I understand that, because the term near-death experience would suppose that you are almost dead first. But
right.
The term was coined by Ray Moody in his during his practice as a medical doctor. He came across a number of these stories of people who had these near-death experiences. There was not the terminology there yet, but he discovered that when people had such a thing, they were clinically dead. So that was after trauma or a medical critical situation. And that is the reason why he called these experiences near-death experiences. But after a while, scientists discovered that there are also people who, for instance, were in a psychological depression, a severe depression, existential depression, or just, I even came across someone who was sitting on the beach, and that was really amazing. It was baffling to me because, he told the whole story of a near-death experience with a life review, with seeing the light, with conversing with the light, things like that. And it was a complete, a very deep near-death experience, but he was sitting on the beach having a very thorough and deep discussion with his girlfriend. And during that discussion, he had this experience. Well, I thought it was very, remarkable.
Well, yeah, that would be. Did it interrupt the discussion? I mean, I would think it'd be kind of hard to talk to her at the same time experience something like that. I mean, did he indicate that he had to stop talking to her at the time in order to fully absorb the experience?
Yeah, you would think that, yeah. He had an experience, and if he would tell what the experience is, he would take at least, a quarter of an hour, half an hour, and the whole experience seemed to last like a very long time. But he noticed that she was talking, and then her lips were moving, and then he went into this experience. And when he finished his experience, when he came by, but I would suppose that if you go over to that other area, that they want to welcome you in the best way they can, and if you are really vested into a Christian religion, you would be perhaps startled if you would see Krishna or so.
True.
Or the other way around. So all these religious celebrities, as you call them, have been seen in near-death experiences.
Now, then after that, they do proceed, because you were talking about this gentleman on the beach too. Let's talk about the life review for a minute and what that sort of entails for the people who have experienced it. It's not like that judgment thing that most religions teach, is it?
No, it's totally different, and that is one of the things that I find very interesting, and for me that is one of the reasons why I think this is really true. They have the opportunity to see their life in very small details if they want, and it comes in different forms. Either sometimes it is like pictures flashing by, or sometimes it's like a film, or sometimes it's like emotions. But they can drill down to the smallest details. And the interesting thing is that they can see and feel exactly what their actions have had as a cause to someone else. And the interesting thing is that that this feeling about how this happened to someone else is so direct that it is as if they can feel it themselves, as if they are that other person themselves. I've heard that several times, and it is a very direct way of getting to understand what you have done in this world, or what your effect was in this world. And I think that is amazing. It is kind of an innovation to our thinking, because in the religions like the Christianity, in Muslim, in the Islam, and also in Judaism, there is this God outside of us who is going to judge us. He is, it's always a man.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to judge us and then send us to hell, or we can proceed to go to heaven. But that is not the case in the stories of near-death experiences. If there is anyone who is judging, then it is yourself. And it is because you at that moment, when you're in the presence of this unconditional love, you see what you have done to others, and you have to understand that you are in this, that you can compare this unconditional love to the way you have been behaving in this world. And that is something that, back again, she just had finished that one sentence, and then and she didn't really understand that he had this experience, because it was within the sentence. Maybe she noticed that I didn't speak to her, of course. I spoke to him only. And maybe she noticed only that he was not really there in the conversation at that moment. But she didn't notice anything particularly. But he had this experience, and it changed his life thoroughly. It really changed his life very much.
Well, I would assume something like that would absolutely have to. Take us through a prototypical, I mean, I know you said that not every near-death experience is the same, but let's take us through, say, a generalized idea of what most people would experience who have had a near-death experience.
Okay, that would, first people would escape from their body. They would be hovering above their body, and seeing what is happening. They would see medical doctors or nurses trying to rescue them, or something else. They sit in a car against a tree, and then they might see more, and that would be interesting, because sometimes they see things that can be confirmed later on, and those are interesting moments. But then, if some people, I told you that not one experience is the same as the other. So some people just go back to their body again, but some people go further. They would go through a tunnel that is mentioned often, but some people just disappear directly into the light, or and then when they would go further, they might see wonderful environments. There is a very easy communication always, a very loving communication if it's there. Although I do have to say that there are also distressful NDEs. But the knowledge seems to be available and accessible for all of them to tap into, and it's vast. It's as if they can ask a question or just think of a question, before finishing the question, the answer is already there, and that is interesting too. And another thing that's interesting is that time and space seem to be no limitations to them. That there are people who have told that they were thinking about their parents because they were in an accident, and they were curious how their parents would be. And then at that moment in time, they would be at the house of their parents and would see what is going on there. And other people say time is no problem, because and they, all these experiences are ineffable. They cannot find the right words or concepts that we use on Earth to express what they have gone through. And time is one of those things they really can't wrap their fingers around. Some people say it was not in time; it was between time. And a very nice quote that I always want to tell is, it was not, the time was all there at the same time. And that gives you the impression that there is a unity universe.
Well, I mean, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the most important thing I should mention is that there is this love that is there, and the peace and the quiet and the happiness, but especially the love is something that overwhelms them so much, and this love is mentioned often as unconditional, especially when it comes from the light, and you have to understand what it means if it is unconditional. Mm-hmm. It means that there are no conditions attached. It doesn't mean that you need to do something in particular. You don't need to follow a certain diet or so, or have to be dressed up in specific clothes or pray every day in a certain direction or so. It is there for you, and there are no conditions to have it.
That is an amazing feeling, and I can totally understand why that would be so overwhelming or whelming or welcoming, or whatever the term would be for those people who experience that. Now, is it typical for most people to say that they were met by, a deceased relative or not?
Not always, but there are people who see deceased relatives, but some people do only see beings of light, and some people only see the light. And some people just sit in a garden that is so wonderful, and then the flowers have such a colors that they can't find them on Earth anymore, these colors. And it depends on, and not one NDE is the same as another.
Well, let me ask you this question then, because you did do the research on the five religions and the different experiences. So, for instance, religious celebrities, Jesus, Buddha, has a person who has passed over, say, who's a Buddhist or a Hindu, have they ever been surprised in seeing Jesus? Or, you know what I'm trying to say? Or
yeah, of course. Yeah, most of the time, well, I'm living in a Western country with mainly Christian religions. They would see Jesus or Mary. But I know of some Muslims who have also seen Muhammad, and I know of a Hindu who saw some Hindu gods. Most of the time, if someone is really into a specific religion, they wouldn't see someone from another religion. And I don't know the reason why.
All right, so how did you go about researching this book, Messages from the Light?
Well, that was based on my previous book on near-death experiences and religions. I had so many discussions and interviews with people who had a near-death experience that I thought I should do something more and write something more about that. So not comparing the religions with near-death experiences, which I did in my first book, but in this book, I thought I should stick to the themes that people with near-death experiences come up with, and there are a lot of themes that they come up with. And the interesting thing for me was that I thought these experiences are also important for people who didn't have an experience like that.
Okay, why is that?
Well, for myself, if I speak for myself, then it learns me how to what more or less the purpose is of being here, and how to go about things. And I think if people would listen carefully to what people with near-death experiences say, and to the themes, then I think we will change more towards a much better life for everyone.
What constitutes a near-death experience exactly?
Yeah, that's a interesting question, because we have to understand that not one near-death experience is the same as another. There are no two near-death experiences that are the same. They're all different. So that's where it starts off with. Mm-hmm. And people who had a near-death experience are, most of the time they are convinced that this is the first step into their afterlife, or how you want to call that. And Yeah, and then if you look at the contents of near-death experiences, they say that they have seen an unearthly environment, sometimes with cities or gardens, but very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And what they always say is that there is a sense of peace and quiet and happiness. If they had pain before they had their experience because of some kind of medical critical situation, and that pain just disappears. And talking about medical critical situations, most experiences happen during such a critical situation, but not all. There are a lot of stories of people who had a near-death experience, who have had similar kind of stories, but didn't have a critical medical situation, and that's interesting as well.
Well, one of the reasons why this is fascinating to me is because, I've had, reading through, my preparation for questions and reading through your book, I noticed certain things that people had